Hi, my name is Brielle. My sister-in-law stood in my mother's kitchen, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You still have a key to my house?" Then she called the police on me, accused me of breaking in. They came, they questioned, and when they read the deed out loud, she couldn't speak. But that moment, that wasn't the beginning. That was just the first time anyone else saw what I had known for years, that I'd been erased, slowly, carefully, from the very home I grew up in. They changed the locks. They sold my mother's wedding dress. They threw a memorial in her name and left me out of the program entirely. And now I'm here to ask, what would you do if your own family tried to rewrite you out of your own story? There's something about a woman's voice, soft and sharp all at once, that can turn a Sunday into a memory you'll never unhear. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. I had a pan of baked mac and cheese, the good kind with 3 cheeses and crushed garlic croutons on top. I'd spent the better part of the afternoon making it for my brother Ellison. He'd always loved it since we were kids, and I figured I'd drop it off and stay for dinner like I usually did on Sundays. I pulled into the driveway of the house on East Henry Street just as the sun began to dip low, casting that soft orange glow over the magnolia trees Mama planted when we were little. The house had changed, of course. The porch had been painted gray, the hanging ferns replaced with minimalist lanterns. But it was still, technically, mine. Still holding the warm tray, I used the spare key I kept on my chain. Mama gave it to me back in 2009, said it was my responsibility after Daddy passed. The lock clicked open like it always did. But the moment the door creaked, I knew something was wrong. The music playing inside was loud, bass-heavy, and something smelled more like imported essential oil than home cooking. And then she appeared, Callista, tall, poised, holding a stemless wine glass like she'd just walked off a Pinterest board. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Brielle," she said, eyebrows raised, tone clipped. "You still have a key to my house?" It took me a second to process it. She didn't say our house, not even the house. She said I blinked. "Excuse me?" She shifted her weight, holding the glass tighter. "I mean, Ellison and I weren't expecting you. You didn't text." "I didn't think I had to. I just brought dinner. I always do on Sundays." That's something we're kind of rethinking. Boundaries, you know? Boundaries. I stood there, frozen, mac and cheese cooling in my arms. She didn't offer to take the dish, didn't invite me in. Just stood, perfectly still, in the middle of the living room I grew up in, acting like I was the intruder. I forced a smile, the kind that hurts your cheeks. "I'll just leave this here then," I said, stepping back out and placing the dish on the porch table. Callista didn't say a word. I walked back to my car. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. But my hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't even tell Ellison that night. I didn't want to make it worse. But something about that moment stayed lodged in me like a splinter under the skin. The next afternoon, I stopped by again, wanted to pick up an old photo album I'd left in the study. This time, the key didn't work. At first, I thought maybe the door was jammed. I tried again. Nothing. I tried the back door, also locked. I checked the lock itself. They'd changed it. No warning, no call, no note. And just when I was standing there, debating whether to knock or walk away, my phone buzzed. "Please don't come unannounced. It stresses the kids." Callista. They didn't even have kids. I stood on the porch for a full 2 minutes before turning around. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment with a stack of manila folders. I hadn't looked through them in years, but I knew exactly where to find the one that mattered. Original deed, 1987. My name, clear as day, signed over from Mama. I remembered the day she did it, said it was for safekeeping. I had a better head for numbers than Ellison, she said. Besides, I was the one who stayed behind after Daddy died, helped her keep the place from falling apart. Ellison had been in Chicago then, working IT. Callista was just someone we saw at Christmas. I placed the folder on the coffee table, got up, and poured myself some water. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. This wasn't about a key anymore. It wasn't even about a dish of food or a Sunday dinner. This was about being told, without anyone having to say it, that I no longer belonged in the home I helped preserve. It was about someone walking into the story halfway and trying to rewrite the beginning. Mama's voice echoed in my head from years ago. "This house is your safe space, Brielle. Protect it." I swallowed that memory like it was medicine, bittersweet and steadying. They'd changed the locks, sure, but they hadn't changed the deed, they hadn't changed the history, and they certainly hadn't changed me. I opened my laptop, scanned the deed, saved it to 3 folders, uploaded it to cloud storage, and emailed it to myself, just in case. Then I leaned back in my chair, hands crossed over my chest. "No one gets to lock me out of what's mine," I said out loud, "not even family. The funny part is, they never even asked whose name was on the deed. 2 weeks had passed since they changed the locks. 2 weeks since I stood on my own porch, reading a text message that implied I was a disturbance in a home I practically raised myself in. But this Sunday wasn't like the others. It was Mama's memorial. Callista had taken the liberty of planning it, sent out invitations, posted about it on her curated social media with tags like #FamilyMatriarch and #LegacyOfLove, each one more nauseating than the last. She called it a celebration of Maris Carter's life hosted by her loving son and daughter-in-law. No mention of me, not even once. Still, I came. I didn't show up to fight or make a scene. I wore a dark green dress Mama always liked on me, packed her favorite peach crumble, and tucked the old photo album into a tote bag. The one with Polaroids from birthdays, church picnics, Christmas mornings. The album Callista once described as a little too dated to display. The driveway was already lined with cars by the time I pulled in. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest. My heels clicked against the sidewalk like a countdown. When I stepped through the door, no key this time, just a knock and a wait. No one greeted me. The house was full, buzzing with voices and soft jazz in the background. Strangers smiled politely. Cousins nodded. Nobody looked surprised, but nobody looked comfortable either. The living room had been cleared out and replaced with folding chairs, trays of catered food, and a digital frame on the mantel cycling through photos of Mama. But as I looked closer, I realized all the pictures were ones I hadn't taken. The ones Callista liked, the presentable ones. Filtered, cropped, empty of context. Callista floated across the room like she owned the air itself. She spotted me and smiled. "We weren't sure you'd come," she said, voice light but sharp as glass. "I wasn't sure you'd remember she had a daughter," I replied. She blinked. The smile faltered but didn't fall. "Well, you're here now. Make yourself at home." I glanced around. There was nowhere to sit. Every chair was occupied. My own brother, Ellison, stood near the hallway, talking to one of our uncles. He made eye contact with me, just for a second, then looked away. I turned, found a quiet corner in the hallway by the staircase, and sat on the floor. Plate balanced on my knees, photo album beside me. I opened the program. Thick cardstock, floral border, elegant font. Hosted by Ellison Callista Carter. Under Children of Maris Carter, there was just one name, Ellison James Carter. My breath caught. They didn't just forget me, they erased me. I stared at the words like they were written in fire. I was her only daughter. The one who stayed behind when Daddy passed. The one who took her to her doctor appointments, cleaned her house, helped her fill out paperwork, bathed her when her knees gave out. But according to this program, I was never even there. An older cousin, Alma, shuffled past me and paused. She knelt slightly, resting a hand on my shoulder. "I saw your name wasn't listed," she whispered. "It's not right." I looked up at her, forcing a calm nod. "Thanks for noticing." She patted my hand, but that was it. No one said anything to Ellison. No one questioned Callista. Because in families like mine, silence wears a polite smile. As people filtered toward the dining room for the sit-down dinner, I followed slowly. I stood near the threshold, watching everyone take their seats. There were exactly 16 chairs, and not one of them had a place card for me. I stood there for a beat too long. Callista caught my eye and offered a sugary-laced explanation. "Oh, sorry, Brielle. We weren't sure you'd attend, so we kept it small." "Of course." I nodded slowly. "No worries." I turned, walked back to the hallway, and settled again onto the wooden floor with my plate. Someone passed by, their eyes lingering a second too long before moving on. They didn't offer me a seat. Nobody did. Across from me, just above the sideboard, hung a new version of the family portrait Mama had once cherished. Except now it was cropped. Strategically, my face was gone. And in its place, Ellison stood slightly closer to Callista, their shoulders touching. The lighting had been softened, the background blurred. It looked glossy, picture perfect. Just without me. I didn't eat much. The food tasted like cardboard. My heart felt heavy, but not in the way that begged for pity. It burned, not the kind of burn that explodes. No, this was slower, steady, focused. When the evening wound down, I gathered my things quietly, walked toward the foyer, and took a picture of the memorial board. Just one. I didn't post it, didn't send it. I simply saved it to my phone, tucked it away in a folder I'd labeled Truth. They wanted me gone, invisible, forgettable, but I wasn't going to let that happen. Not quietly, not anymore. And I was about to show them everything they tried to hide. The day after the memorial dinner, I woke early. I couldn't sleep much the night before. My mind kept turning over the same phrase, "They want me invisible." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there on the edge of my bed, letting the weight of what they'd done settle in. But deep down, something had shifted. And that something wasn't going back into silence. By mid-morning, I was at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea, scrolling through Facebook without much thought, just habit. That's when I saw it, tagged in a post by an old high school friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but still shared random life updates with, was an article from a lifestyle blog. One of those modern Southern design sites full of velvet chairs, exposed beams, and carefully curated farmhouse chic. The title read, "Designing Legacy, the Home That Heals Generations." And there she was, Callista, framed in perfect lighting, smiling beside the living room fireplace, my fireplace. The one Mama and I had spent a week refinishing after the flood in 2012. The one with the old stonework that had taken 3 trips to get right. In the photo, Callista leaned one elbow on the mantel like she'd been born beside it. The caption beneath the image made my jaw clench. "We bought this fixer-upper 3 years ago and poured our souls into making it a home." I blinked, reread it. We bought it. They didn't buy anything. They were still living in that house rent-free because I let them. I read the article top to bottom. It went on about Callista's vision, how she rescued a decaying Southern gem and turned it into a space for family, healing, and tradition. There was even a photo of the dining room. Mama's antique table was gone, replaced by some sterile glass setup with chrome legs. The article didn't mention me, not once, not a footnote, not a "thanks to Brielle for the opportunity." I didn't exist. I took a screenshot, then another, saved the link, emailed it to myself with the subject line, evidence. Later that week, I made a quiet excuse to drop off a box of old winter coats at the house, stuff I figured Ellison might still use, and I didn't want to keep hoarding space. I knocked. Callista wasn't home. Ellison answered. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "Hey," I said, holding the box. "Just dropping these off." He nodded. "Yeah, sure, thanks." No eye contact, no small talk. I stepped into the hallway and froze. Hanging on the wall just beside the coat closet was the family photo. The one Mama loved, Christmas 2013. Me, Ellison, her, and Daddy. Smiling. Except now it was different. My spot in the photo was blurred, literally blurred out, like someone had taken a digital brush and smeared my face into the background. It was subtle. If you hadn't seen the original, maybe you wouldn't notice. But I noticed. And right below it, taped to the wall, was a crayon drawing in a child's handwriting. My family, Mommy, Daddy, Grandma. That's it. No Auntie B, no me. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once and placed the coat box near the door. "I'll let you go," I said. Ellison didn't even try to stop me. Outside on the porch, I paused. I needed a breath, the kind that burns on the way down. Aunt Doreen was walking her dog down the sidewalk. She spotted me and waved. I waited for her to come closer. "Hey, sugar," she said, pulling her coat tighter. "Didn't expect to see you around here. I was just leaving something for Ellison." She glanced at the house, then leaned a little closer. "Can I ask you something, baby?" I nodded. "Did you really sell them the house? That's what Callista's been telling folks, that you gave it up, said it was too much for you to keep up with." My stomach dropped. "No," I said evenly. "I gave them a key. I never gave them the deed." Aunt Doreen sighed. "Thought so, just wanted you to hear it from someone. Folks around here are starting to ask questions." I thanked her, walked to my car, and sat behind the wheel without starting it. Then I opened my phone and created a new folder titled The Truth. Into it went every screenshot, every email, the deed, the article, and now a photo I'd taken of the altered family portrait just before I walked out. They were erasing me in layers, digitally, socially, emotionally, quietly, but deliberately. But what they didn't know was that I still held the negatives, the original deeds, the unfiltered photos, the memories they couldn't crop or filter or recaption. By sunset, I was back home. I pulled into my driveway, parked, and sat there for a while. I watched the orange sky fade into navy, the stars start to prick through the dark. Inside, I laid the documents out on my kitchen table and began organizing them. My mother always said, "When people don't give you room to speak, write your own script." So I did. That night, I didn't cry. I planned, because silence was no longer protection, and I wasn't letting them write me out. I had barely slept the night before. After archiving the photos and screenshots, my thoughts wouldn't stop looping. Everything felt calculated now. The public image Callista was building, the way she'd rewritten our family story without so much as a blink. And still, somewhere deep down, I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't all intentional. I let that hope die the following morning. I drove downtown to the county clerk's office in Savannah. It was a humid Wednesday, the kind where your skin sticks to the seatbelt and everything smells faintly like wet sidewalk and pine sap. I parked on the shaded side of the street and made my way inside. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't need a cheer squad. What I needed was proof. The clerk helped me pull old homeowner records tied to my mother's name and mine. I paid for certified copies of everything: deed, property tax filings, title verification, notarized affidavits from Mama's will. Each page was like a nail in the coffin of every lie Callista had been passing around town. As I stepped outside, folder in hand, I ran into Mr. Calvin, our old mailman. He was retired now, but still walked the neighborhood most mornings, chatting with neighbors like he used to when we were kids. "Well, look who's back in town," he said, tipping his cap. "You still fightin' for that house?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He looked at me like I should already know. "Callista's been tellin' folks for years you gave it to them. Said it was too much for you after your mama passed. She even said you moved away and didn't want nothing to do with the family place." I felt my jaw tighten. "She said that to you?" He nodded. "At the 4th of July cookout, she was real confident about it too. Loud enough for half the street to hear." That was 3 summers ago. I gripped the folder tighter. "Thanks for letting me know." He gave a small nod and walked on. Back in my car, I turned the ignition but didn't drive. I just sat there, letting the engine hum while the weight of that revelation sank in. That evening, I went up into the attic of my apartment to find an old cedar chest I hadn't opened since Mama died. I knew what I was looking for. It took me a while: dusty boxes, folded quilts, the smell of mothballs and old paper. But when I found the worn, navy blue Bible with the floral bookmark, I opened it gently. Inside, tucked between Psalm 23 and a handwritten grocery list from years ago, was a note. Mama's handwriting, small and careful. "Brielle, if this house ever becomes noise instead of peace, protect it." It was built for shelter, not status. My hands trembled, not out of anger, but because for the first time in a long while, I felt seen, validated, like Mama knew this day would come, like she had left me a compass just in case I lost my way in the noise. I sat there with that note for a long while. No tears, just quiet. A clarity I hadn't had in weeks began to settle in my chest. Later that night, I began pulling every file I had. I laid them out across my dining table like a war map: utility bills in my name, tax forms addressed to me, probate filings listing me as sole beneficiary, insurance papers, maintenance receipts, anything that proved I had been the one holding it all together while Callista redecorated her lie. The next morning, I made an appointment with a local estate attorney, someone recommended by one of Mama's old church friends. Ms. Kerrigan was sharp, older, and didn't waste time. After reviewing everything, she said, "If the house is in your name and there's no legal transfer, then legally you're still the owner. End of story." I nodded slowly. "Then why do I feel like I'm the one trespassing?" She leaned forward. "Because people don't have to steal the deed to steal your belonging. All they need to do is act like you never mattered. Silence is a powerful weapon, Brielle." That hit harder than I expected. She handed the file back. "I'd suggest a formal notice. Document everything. Be precise. And don't say anything you wouldn't want read out loud in court." I left her office and drove straight home. By nightfall, I had typed out a letter, not some emotional vent, just facts, measured, firm, professional. I reviewed it twice, then emailed it to both Callista and Ellison, copying Kerrigan on the message. Subject: Notice of Intent. I will need access to the property by end of next week. I am formally requesting full documentation of any structural or interior changes made without consent, including receipts and before-after photos. Failure to comply will result in legal action. No threats, no dramatics, just the truth. And truth, this time, would not be ignored. The email had been sent. I triple-checked it before clicking send, knowing full well what it meant. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop working. Every second I sat in that quiet apartment, I could hear Mama's voice in the back of my head. Some lines, baby, you don't let people cross, not even family. The next morning, I left the house early. I didn't go to the house or the attorney's office. I needed a breath of fresh air that didn't smell like courtroom preparation, so I went to River Street. The antique shop at the corner had always been one of Mama's favorites. Sometimes we'd spend hours there just browsing, sipping sweet tea from to-go cups, running our fingers across old wood and dusty brass. I stepped inside, letting the little bell above the door announce me. The smell of old paper and worn leather filled the room. The woman behind the counter looked up. "Brielle Carter?" I blinked, surprised. "Yes?" She smiled. "Your family was in here not too long ago. Sold us a gorgeous lace wedding dress, real vintage, pearl buttons, long train. Belonged to your mother, I think." It felt like the air went out of the room. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Had your mother's initials stitched inside. CLC? Ring any bells?" My fingers tightened around the handle of my purse. "That was Maricel Carter, my mother." "Oh," she said, suddenly more reserved. "I assumed Callista had the right." I smiled tightly. She didn't. I left the shop, walked straight to my car, and sat there with the engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't just a dress. That gown had been in our family for 3 generations. Mama wore it, her mother before her. I used to sneak into her closet and run my fingers down those tiny pearl buttons, imagining what her wedding day must have been like. Now it was gone, sold to a stranger. I didn't go home. Instead, I stopped at a coffee shop and opened my email. As I sipped from a cup that tasted like cardboard, a new message popped up from a former coworker, Michelle. Subject: Thought of you. Inside was a flyer. Digital, glossy, professional. The Anna Foundation presents Preserving Southern Heritage in honor of Maricel Carter. Location: Savannah Historical Society, Ballroom. Date: Saturday, 6 p.m. I stared at it for a full minute. Anna Foundation. That wasn't a family name. That was Callista's middle name. I scrolled down to read the mission statement. It praised modern Southern women reviving traditional family values and honoring matriarchs who built foundations. There was a quote from Callista beneath Mama's picture. "My mother-in-law taught me what resilience looks like. This foundation is my way of passing that torch." I nearly dropped the phone. That was my mother. My torch. Callista had taken her name, her story, her photo, and wrapped them in a fundraiser she didn't ask permission for. I picked up the phone and called Ellison. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey," he said, unsure. "Everything okay?" "Did you know she sold Mama's wedding dress?" I asked. Pause. "I thought maybe she donated it for the event." "She sold it, Ellison, to a shop downtown." He was quiet. "And the foundation, using Mama's name, did she get permission for that too?" "She's trying to honor her, Bree. I thought you'd appreciate that." "No," I said flatly. "She's monetizing her memory. She's using her name like a brand." "That's not honoring, that's exploitation." "I didn't know," he murmured. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Well, now you do." I hung up before he could respond. Back at home, I scanned everything I could. Ownership papers, archived emails, even Mama's handwritten notes. Then I sat down and wrote one final email. To Callista Carter, Ellison Carter. CC, Attorney Patricia Kerrigan. Subject, formal notice. Unauthorized use of family name and property. Body, Callista. Any further use of my family's name, image, or personal property, including likeness, photographs, heirlooms, or associated items, without my written consent will be pursued in civil court. You have until Monday at 5 p.m. EST to remove all references and cease any public-facing campaigns using the name or memory of Maris L. E. Carter. Please see attached. Copy of original deed. Probate records listing me as sole heir. Handwritten note from Maris L. Carter regarding property intent. Certified document of wedding dress appraisal and photo. This is your last informal notice. Brielle Carter. I hit send. There was no shaking in my hands this time. Some lines you don't cross. And some, when crossed, don't allow you back. But I always write back in ink. Friday morning, I sat across from Miss Kerrigan at her office, a place with more mahogany than warmth. The walls were lined with law books and case photos. It smelled like paper and old arguments. She slid a manila folder across her desk toward me and opened it slowly. They used this, she said, tapping the page, as evidence of implied transfer. Claimed you wrote it 2 years ago as a gesture to make the house theirs permanently. I leaned forward. The document inside was a scan of a note I'd once written on yellow-lined paper. A quick, informal message I'd left for Ellison when I was traveling, letting him know the water heater had been repaired and the place was his to use while I was away, except the version I was staring at now had an added sentence at the bottom. Consider this house yours, permanently. My breath caught. That's not my handwriting, I said, pointing. That sentence wasn't there. Kerrigan nodded. It's a clean scan, but the signature at the bottom was lifted from another document, a check endorsement, to be exact. We can verify that with forensic review, but it won't be cheap. I don't care what it costs, I said. I want it on record. Then we proceed. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a sealed envelope in hand and delivered it directly to the house. I stayed in my car across the street and watched from a distance. Through the open window, I heard the dogs bark. Callista opened the door, still wearing her silk robe and holding a mug of something overpriced. The courier handed her the envelope and asked for a signature. Her face changed as she skimmed the document. She wasn't surprised, just annoyed, the kind of irritation people get when they're forced to acknowledge they've been caught. A few minutes later, Ellison stepped outside. I watched them talk, Callista pacing, gesturing wildly, Ellison staring down at the paper like it had betrayed him. I imagined the moment he saw the photocopy of my mother's handwritten note attached to the packet with a single sticky note. The key you changed no longer matters. This house already knows who it belongs to. I didn't linger. That night, close to 11, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. Ellison stood there, still in his work uniform, face drawn, shoulders slouched like a boy being sent to apologize by a teacher. I opened the door. You want to come in? He nodded, eyes red. Just for a minute. I poured him a glass of water and set it on the coffee table. He didn't drink it. I thought we were building something real, he said, voice low. You were, I replied. But she was building it on ground that didn't belong to her. He rubbed his forehead. I didn't know about the forged letter. I believe you. He looked up, surprised. But that doesn't make this okay, I added. I don't know how to fix it. I sat across from him. You don't have to fix it. You just have to stop pretending it's not happening. He nodded slowly. She's not who I thought she was. That may be true, but I'm exactly who you knew I was. He stood after a while, still quiet. I didn't ask him to stay. The next morning, I returned to the house. Alone. I used my spare key. Not because I expected it to work, but because I wanted to hear it click. It didn't. The locks had been changed again, so I rang the bell. No one answered. I unlocked the side gate, walked into the backyard, and entered through the kitchen door. The house was quiet. Callista must have gone out. Ellison likely at work. I moved through each room slowly, deliberately. Sticky notes were everywhere. On the fridge, caterer confirmed, check gluten-free options. On the mirror, brand pitch Wetzel Heather Wed 2 p.m. On a cabinet, paint swatches, coastal gray versus driftwood beige. They'd renamed the home without ever speaking it aloud. I walked through the hallway to the front room. One by one, I peeled the sticky notes from the walls and crumpled them in my hand. I didn't rush. I didn't mutter a word, just removed them, each one a silent erasure of a narrative I never agreed to. I paused in the dining room. There on the table was a clipboard with plans for a photography shoot. Backyard reveal for Anna Living series, finalized setup by Thursday. Anna. Again. That name didn't belong here. Neither did this plan. I took a pen from my purse and scrawled on the bottom of the page, unauthorized use of property, likeness, or family story will result in immediate legal response. Then I walked to the coat closet, opened the cedar box Mama kept her recipe cards in, and pulled out the very last index card she wrote before her stroke. Lemon pound cake, her favorite. I pressed it flat in my palm, folded it into my coat pocket. I walked out of that house, my house, not as someone reclaiming something lost, but as someone who never relinquished it to begin with. They could change the locks all they wanted. They could paint over the walls, replace the furniture, blur out my photo. But they couldn't change what was written in the foundation, and they sure as hell couldn't erase what I was about to put down in ink. The ink on the legal motion hadn't dried before I was already back at the house, camera in hand, scanning every corner for what might be needed later in court. Ms. Kerrigan had given me a checklist, items to photograph, specific damage or alterations to document, and I followed it like scripture. The morning light cut through the shutters in sharp lines, casting shadows on hardwood floors that once echoed Mama's footsteps. I was halfway down the hall when I heard the side gate creak. Turning toward the sound, I found myself face to face with someone I hadn't seen in years, Mrs. Estelle. She used to work for Mama once a week. Cleaned, cooked sometimes, helped when Mama's knees got too stiff. She had a memory like a steel trap and a voice like warm linen. She looked surprised to see me. "Well, my lord, Brielle Carter, I thought you were long gone." "I'm still around," I said softly. "Just not always seen." Estelle stepped inside without asking. She looked around the hallway like someone visiting a gravesite that had been redecorated without permission. She walked over to the fireplace and ran her fingers across the new marble Callista had chosen. "Doesn't suit the house," she muttered. Then her gaze returned to me, sharper now. "I need to tell you something." I nodded, waiting. "A few months back," she began slowly, "Callista asked me something strange. She said, if something ever happened to Brielle, would it be easier to change the title of the house?" I stared at her. "She laughed after," Estelle added, eyes narrowing. "Like it was a joke, but it didn't feel like one. I never forgot it." A chill ran through me, not fear, but clarity, a confirmation of what I had already suspected but hadn't yet voiced out loud. "She said that out loud?" I asked, my tone as even as I could manage. "Clear as day," Estelle replied. "And with that same little smile she always wears when she's stirring a pot she ain't got no business near." "Thank you for telling me," I said, quietly. Estelle touched my arm. "You're your mama's child. Don't let that woman rewrite history." That evening, after I got home and sorted through the photos I'd taken, my phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number, but I knew the tone. Once she's legally out, we apply for homestead exemption. House becomes ours. Easy. It took me a second to realize who had sent it. Then a second message followed. Oops, wrong person. No follow-up, no apology, no call, just silence. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in one hand, and stared at the screen until it went dark. The arrogance, the assumption, the absolute boldness of planning my erasure, like I was some bump in her roadmap to ownership. I forwarded the message to Ms. Kerrigan immediately, tagging it with the subject, Intent to commit fraud, confirmed. The next morning, I met with her again. This isn't just civil anymore, she said, not even looking up from the document she was marking with highlighter. If that signature was forged and we have evidence of deliberate intent to deceive, this crosses into criminal territory. I didn't flinch. Then we go there, she paused. Are you sure? Once this goes into court record, there's no turning back. I exhaled slowly. She tried to delete me from the house. Let's show her how deletion works, legally. Later that afternoon, I returned to the house. This time, I didn't just mail the documents or rely on a third-party courier. I walked in. Callista was in the living room, seated cross-legged on the new cream sofa, scrolling through her tablet like nothing in the world was about to shift beneath her feet. Ellison stood by the stairs, holding a coffee mug he wasn't drinking. I stepped forward, folder in hand. She glanced up. Didn't expect to see you here. I figured, I said calmly. I set the folder on the coffee table and looked at both of them. Inside was the legal motion, an affidavit from Estelle, a record of Callista's mistaken text, and the confirmation that the deed had never been transferred, notarized, or consented. This ends, I said, locking eyes with her. Today, Callista raised her chin. You're bluffing. No, I said, voice steady. You're trespassing. Ellison's hand twitched on the mug. He looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw guilt instead of avoidance. You forged my handwriting, you misrepresented my family's story, and you told a woman who wiped our mama's windows that my disappearance might make this easier for you. Callista opened her mouth to speak. I held up a hand. I've been polite. I've been quiet. I've been every Southern value they try to instill in little girls who grow up without raising their voice. I leaned forward. But I'm not quiet anymore. The room was still. You have 48 hours to begin vacating. If I see your face in this house past that deadline, I will bring the sheriff, a news crew, and every single legal tool I have, and I will not stop. Callista looked like she wanted to spit venom, but instead, she stood up and walked out of the room. Ellison didn't move. I turned without another word, walked to the door, and stepped back into the sunlight. The storm had hit, but I wasn't the one standing in the rain anymore. And when the door opened again, it wasn't mine they slammed shut. I stood on the porch, folder in hand, a solid oak presence behind me, Ms. Kerrigan, and two Savannah officers in uniform to my left. The early afternoon sun cast long shadows across the front steps, and even the wind seemed to pause. Callista opened the door with the same polished smirk she'd worn since the first time she ever walked into Mama's house, calling it quaint. Except now, her smile was tight, calculated, like someone who knew exactly how thin the ice was beneath her heels but still planned to pretend it was solid. "You're trespassing," she said before I could speak. Her voice was louder than necessary, projecting toward the neighbors. I didn't flinch. Neither did Kerrigan. One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint, but we're here to verify ownership of the property. If you don't mind—" "Oh, I do mind," Callista cut in. "This is my home. That woman," she jabbed a finger toward me, has been harassing us for weeks. My husband and I. Kerrigan lifted the folder, calm and composed. We'd like to present documentation that disputes that claim. The officer nodded. Let's see what you've got. We moved into the living room. Callista stormed toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath. Ellison appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes hollow. He didn't say a word, just leaned against the railing like someone watching a courtroom drama unfold in his own home. I laid out the documents on the dining table. Original deed, notarized in 2004 under my name. Mama's will. Property tax receipts paid in full for the past 18 years. And a verification letter from the county clerk's office. The officer scanned each page, lips pursed. Then, in a voice clear and direct, he read aloud. Owner of record, Brielle Carter, effective since July 2004. The silence in the room was instant and violent. Callista, who'd returned from the kitchen, froze. That's not possible, she said, stepping back like the words had hit her. The second officer looked up. Ma'am, your name is nowhere on this paperwork. There's no lease, no title transfer, no recorded deed in your name or your husband's. But she gave it to us, Callista said, voice tightening. She let us live here. She said we could make it ours. Ellison spoke then, voice low. She didn't. We just acted like she did. The officers turned to me. Do you want us to begin removal proceedings today, Miss Carter? I looked at Callista, then at Ellison. He couldn't meet my eyes. No, I said. They have 72 hours. After that, the locks change, and everything else does too. Kerrigan packed the documents, handed copies to the officers, and nodded to me. The tension had drained just enough to breathe again, but my chest still felt like a stone rested on it. Callista stared at me, jaw clenched. You always wanted to play the victim. You never did like sharing. I stepped toward her, not close, but close enough for her to hear me without pretending not to. You didn't just take space. You tried to erase a legacy. Her face flickered. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. I turned away, stepping outside, folder still tucked under my arm. As I reached the porch steps, a breeze rustled through the trees Mama planted when I was 12. I remembered helping her dig the holes in the Georgia heat, both of us sweaty and tired, but laughing. Back then, it had felt like we were planting something that would outlast both of us. Now, I realized I didn't look back when I closed the gate behind me, because I wasn't walking away anymore. I was walking forward. You tried to erase a legacy. That line replayed in my mind more times than I could count in the weeks that followed. 3 Fridays after the officers left with copies of the deed still fresh in their folders, the house stood quiet. There were no slamming car doors, no voices filtered through open windows, no patio lights left on overnight, just the gentle hush of a home exhaling, like it had been holding its breath too. Callista and Ellison were gone. No court battle, no press release, no last-ditch Instagram post full of vague quotes about letting go or moving forward. Just silence. And for once, silence felt holy. I walked back in through the front door the following Monday, key in hand, no pushback. The smell was different, less lavender and lemon oil, more wood and memory. I didn't rush to clean. I didn't redecorate. I just stood in the foyer for a long time, touching the walls like they were skin. Room by room, I reclaimed the space, not by stripping it bare, but by placing things back with intention. In the kitchen, I hung Mama's apron on the hook behind the pantry door. In the den, I set her old recipe box back where it used to live, next to the radio we always left on low volume. I found the quilt she kept on the back of her favorite armchair, folded neatly in a bin Callista had labeled, "Donate." I unfolded it, shook off the dust, and laid it across the foot of the couch like a gentle declaration. This wasn't about design, it was about direction, about rerouting what someone else had tried to sever. The neighbors waved when they saw me on the porch again. A few brought small things, baskets of muffins, sprigs of rosemary, a pie wrapped in plastic that had likely come from the store but was offered with love. I accepted every one. Evenings were the hardest. The quiet was so complete I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel like it had something to say. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch, just rocking, watching the neighborhood drift by. It wasn't grief anymore, it was restoration. Slow, deliberate restoration. The letter from Ellison arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, just my name, in his handwriting. Inside was a single page. I was wrong. I saw her vision so clearly. I ignored your truth. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I see it now. I see you. Ellison, I didn't cry. I didn't burn the letter. I folded it and placed it inside Mama's Bible, in the very spot where she'd once left a note for me. Some bridges don't have to burn. Some just need to be left alone. Sunday mornings became my ritual. I'd wake early, tie on that apron, and bake Mama's sweet bread. The smell filled the house in a way that made time fold in on itself. By 10, the porch would fill with visits. Miss Doreen with her gossip, young Cassie from next door with a flower from her mother's garden, a few curious glances from folks who used to walk past without a word. One afternoon, while sweeping the steps, I saw a familiar sedan slow at the stop sign. The window rolled down just a bit. Ellison, we locked eyes, just for a second. He gave a small nod. I nodded back. And then he drove on. That was enough. That evening, as dusk settled and the sky turned the soft color of cotton, I sat in Mama's old armchair, the quilt warm on my lap, and thought about everything this house had held, and everything it would hold again. I looked around, at the furniture that had come home, the walls free of curated images, the quiet no longer haunted but whole. And I knew, this house isn't just mine because of paper. It's mine because I remembered. I stood still when they tried to erase me. And now, when people walk through that door, they know whose story it carries. Sometimes, the loudest justice is delivered in silence, through a deed, a truth, a name that refuses to be erased. This story isn't just about a house. It's about reclaiming your voice when others try to rewrite your life. Have you ever been pushed out of something that was rightfully yours? What did you do? If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. More real-life revenge stories and family reckonings are coming your way.
Hi, I'm Marlene. My parents used to say I was the strong one, the one who didn't need help, who could figure it out on her own. But then, they bought my brother a franchise. With money they told me didn't exist when I asked for a chance. They even used my name to open accounts, behind my back. And when I said no, they made sure the world knew I was the ungrateful daughter. But what hurts more than betrayal is realizing it wasn't a one-time thing. What if your family spent years quietly rewriting your story, until you didn't recognize yourself in it anymore? Would you speak up, or keep pretending it was love? I was sitting in my parents' living room, sunlight falling in from the half-closed blinds, like it always had. Soft, scattered, making everything feel deceptively peaceful. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say at least 50 times on the drive over, but nothing prepared me for how quickly my voice would feel useless once I was there. I've been working on a proposal for a boutique consulting firm, I began, keeping my tone measured. Small business clients, mid-market strategy, something I know I can make work. I just need help with the startup costs. Not a loan. A backing. My mother didn't even look up from the rim of her coffee mug. You're strong, Marlene, she said with that kind of smile that stretches but doesn't warm. You don't need us for this. You've always figured it out. Your brother, he's different. He needs structure, support. You need to learn the hard way. The words didn't surprise me. Not really. But they still landed like they were aimed. Velma had said variations of that sentence since I was 12. The version where the hard way was character building, as if hardship were some twisted rite of passage handed down to daughters so they'd stop asking. I glanced at my father, Gideon, sitting across the room with his newspaper halfway folded in his lap. He didn't say anything. He never did in these moments. His silence was as consistent as the ticking clock on the wall behind him. The longer I sat there, the more invisible I felt. Not dismissed, disregarded. They hadn't even asked to see the proposal. By the time I stepped out to the porch, my chest was tight, like my ribs had forgotten how to move. I rested my hand on the railing, took in the same street I grew up on. And just like that, the past found its way back. It was summer. I was 10. The driveway had been burning hot under my bare feet as I watched Dorian unwrap the red bike we had both asked for. I had begged. For weeks. We both needed a way to get to school, but I was told girls should walk. That bikes were for boys who'd grow into men who'd need to learn mobility and independence. I would, Velma assured me, one day marry someone who had a car. So what was the point? That afternoon, I walked behind Dorian as he sped off down the road with a grin so wide it nearly wrapped around his head. He didn't even look back. I walked for the next 3 years. That bike sat in the garage most days after the first month. Flat tire, broken chain, whatever excuse it needed to turn into rust. Just like the promises they made. To be fair, to treat us equally, to care. Back in the present, I stepped into the kitchen to rinse a glass. The sun had shifted, casting shadows through the trees outside. Gideon was still in his chair, flipping through another page of the paper like nothing in the last hour meant anything at all. So? I asked, not bothering to soften my voice. Dorian screwed up again? He nodded without looking at me. It's harder for him, Marlene. He wasn't built for the hard way like you were. That's what they always said when he failed. That he needed grace. That life had been unfair to him. That he hadn't been ready. But me? I'd been born ready, apparently. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just rinsed the glass slowly and placed it on the drying rack, like that conversation hadn't just confirmed everything I'd feared for years. It was never about fairness. It was about where they thought the value lived, and it had never lived in me. Later that night, I sat in my car, parked in the driveway for longer than I needed to. Engine off, hands on the steering wheel, breathing in and out like I was trying to prove to myself that I still had control. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was done. This wasn't the first time they chose him, but it would be the last time I let them make me believe that wasn't a choice. Some people grow up learning how to belong. Others, like me, learn how to disappear without ever leaving the room. The irony? That red bike never went anywhere. Just like their hope that I'd eventually fall in line stayed exactly where they left it, sitting in the garage, collecting dust. The sound of my turn signal echoed in the quiet cabin of my car as I merged onto the freeway. I wasn't sure where I was headed. Home, probably. But I wasn't in a rush to get there. Not after the conversation that had just gutted whatever scraps of expectation I had left for my parents. I pulled into a gas station to grab something cold. I needed a break from thinking, needed air, needed anything but more silence back in the office the next morning. I slid into the break room, hoping for a little mindless chatter, maybe a coffee refill, nothing else. But instead, I caught my colleague Josh scrolling through a local business blog. "Hey," he said casually, "isn't your brother Dorian? He's in this article. Says here he just launched a gourmet chicken franchise out near South Park." I blinked once, twice. My hand hovered above the coffee pot like my brain was buffering. "What?" I finally asked. even though I heard every word. Josh turned the screen toward me. There was Dorian's name in bold, beside a press photo of him cutting a ribbon, with both my parents flanking him like proud campaign donors. The headline read, "Local Family Invests in Son's Franchise Dream." I didn't say another word. I nodded and left the room. The hallway outside suddenly felt too narrow, like the walls were folding in on me. I pulled out my phone and searched the article myself. There it was again. The same names, same smiles, same caption. Proud to invest in the future of our family name. Funny. When I had pitched them my business plan 6 months earlier, they told me they couldn't afford to help anyone right now. That they were tightening up, being cautious. That I should take it as a compliment, because I was independent, because I didn't need anyone. But clearly, they had the money. And clearly, they had a favorite. The anger didn't come all at once. It trickled in slowly, like a faucet you don't realize is leaking until it soaks the floor beneath you. Later that week, while organizing some old files on my laptop, I stumbled across a folder labeled NYC Internship, 2014. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside was a saved email thread. Back then, I had received an unpaid internship offer from a human rights nonprofit in Manhattan. It was a golden opportunity. Prestigious, promising, a foot in a door I had dreamed of walking through. I had emailed Mom that night asking for $1,500, just enough to cover the deposit on a sublet and train fare. Not a gift, just a hand to steady me. She replied the next morning, "If you can't make it on your own, maybe you're not ready. Life doesn't hand you comfort, it hands you tests. Learn to stand before you try to run." I never replied, never asked again, and I turned that offer down like I wasn't grieving it. But the truth? That email sat like a stone on my chest for years. Scrolling Facebook one evening, I caught sight of a new photo uploaded by my cousin's wife. A dinner party, long table, string lights, dressed-up plates. I spotted Dorian first, then my parents, then neighbors from the old block. They were celebrating his new venture. There was a caption, "A night to honor Dorian's next big step. Couldn't be prouder of this family." My name wasn't in any tag. I hadn't been invited, hadn't even been told it was happening. But there was my father, smiling wide, holding up what looked like a large ceremonial check, one of those ridiculous props used at galas. My mother had her hand on his shoulder. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Not from tears. From disbelief that I still thought any of this could be different. Back at my apartment, the lights were off. I didn't bother turning them on. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. Then I typed, "They told me no." Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. I minimized the document and pulled up the email from Mom, the one where she told me to figure it out. I took a screenshot, then another of the article, then one of the Facebook photo. I created a new folder on my desktop, Receipts. I wasn't planning to do anything with them, not yet. But the story was changing, and I needed to remember what was real. See, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication or differing values. This was strategic. It was premeditated, practiced, passed down like a family recipe no one ever questioned, and I wasn't going to forget it. I didn't open the folder again after that night. Didn't need to. The images were burned in. The check, the headline, the look on my father's face like he had just passed down a legacy. 3 days later, on a Friday, I was sitting at my desk finishing up quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. Voicemail from Velma. Her tone was clipped, not cold, just businesslike, the way she always sounded when she was about to say something manipulative and pretend it was affection. "Come home Sunday for dinner, just us. Your brother will be there. He wants to thank you." There was no mention of what I had done to warrant thanks. No sign this was meant to be anything but another setup. But I saved the voicemail anyway, because instinct told me I might need it. I stared at my screen for a few minutes after, running over the invitation again and again in my mind. The last time I'd sat across from them, I walked away feeling like an outsider in my own family. And yet, a part of me still wondered, stupidly, if this time might be different. I didn't believe it, but I needed to see it play out, if only to stop myself from imagining any alternate ending. Sunday came faster than I expected. I left my apartment early, telling myself I'd only stay an hour, maybe 2. Charlotte hadn't changed. Same trimmed hedges, same forced pleasantries on front lawns, same uneasy familiarity. I parked by the curb and sat for a minute before heading to the door. The porch light was already on, though it wasn't yet dark. When Velma opened the door, she didn't hug me, just nodded and said, "We're starting soon, come in." Inside, the living room had been rearranged. A rented dining table extended across the space, set with candles and wine glasses. There were people I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, a few folks from Dorian's college days, even a local news anchor. I realized then it wasn't dinner, it was a celebration. A table card labeled "Reserved for Investors" sat dead center. My name wasn't anywhere. Velma handed me a plastic plate. "There's seating over by the hallway. We ran out of chairs." No apology, no effort to make it less awkward. I carried the plate like a waitress at someone else's party and sat on a folding chair between a potted plant and the coat rack. From there, I watched Dorian make a toast with our father beside him, grinning like they'd just closed a billion-dollar deal. "Couldn't have done this without the people who believe in me," Dorian said. "Some folks in this room took a risk on me, and I won't let them down." Cheers. I didn't drink. After dessert and a slideshow of his entrepreneurial journey, people started mingling. That's when Gideon came over, all casual, like we were just catching up. "You have a minute?" he asked, already turning toward the kitchen. I followed, mostly to get away from the noise. He waited until the door closed behind us before he said it. "There's something we need to talk about. It's not about tonight. It's about what comes next." Here it was. Dorian's had some unexpected issues with the accounting side of the business, he continued, eyes avoiding mine. "Nothing catastrophic, just a bump. The bank wants a secondary signer to restructure the franchise loan. It's a technicality, you just need to—" "Use my credit," I finished. He gave a helpless laugh. "You've got excellent credit, Marlene. You've always been stable. This is just helping your brother clear a hurdle." Velma stepped into the room, like she had been waiting outside for her cue. "He needs this. You can do it. That's how families get through things, together." I took a deep breath, looked them both in the eye, and for once, I didn't blink first. "You invited me here to ask for a signature, not a seat, and that tells me exactly where I stand." Velma's smile froze. Gideon rubbed his forehead like I was giving him a migraine. "She's being dramatic again," Velma said, turning away. "This isn't about favoritism." No, it never was. It was about convenience. I left before anyone could notice I was gone. Didn't bother saying goodbye. The night air felt like a relief, like stepping out of a room with too many lies and too little oxygen. The drive back took longer than it should have. I took the long way, past the school I used to walk to, past the grocery store I'd worked at weekends, past the garage where that red bike had stayed untouched for years. No music, just the wind and the hum of the tires. I didn't feel hurt, I felt clarity. They hadn't changed. I had just finally stopped translating their actions into something softer. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to beg them to see me. They made it clear. They fed him steak and poured wine for his future. I brought my own water and left with my dignity. I slept hard that night. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind your body forces when it's exhausted from staying polite too long. I didn't dream, and when I woke up, the sunlight was already pouring in. My phone had 5 missed calls. 3 were from Velma, 1 from my father. The last was unknown, probably her calling from the landline for emphasis. I let them go to voicemail. The first one was short and sweet. "We love you, Marlene. Just think about it, okay?" The second one had more bite. If you're going to throw away everything we built as a family, that's on you. And the last? It stung in the way only Velma could manage. You've always had a problem thinking you're better than us. Maybe that's the real issue. I played them once, saved them, then tossed the phone across the couch. I didn't need more of the same. What I needed was a reminder of why I had said no in the first place. I went to the hallway closet, pulled out a box I hadn't touched since moving. Inside was the notebook, old, soft at the corners, full of coffee stains and hopes that didn't make it past senior year. I flipped through pages filled with late-night ideas, sticky notes with questions I never asked anyone, graphs drawn in pencil that had faded but not disappeared. Then I found it. Family-owned hospitality model. My name in the top corner. Date: March 14th, 2015. The outline, the projections, the brand identity work I'd done between bartending shifts and econ exams. The same model Dorian was now bragging about on a podcast I hadn't even known existed until last night. I'd been at a networking mixer when I overheard it. Some guy in a blazer talking too loudly to impress the woman beside him had pulled up a clip on his phone. My franchise is based on a model I built from scratch, targeting family-centric loyalty, Dorian said through the phone speaker. My stomach didn't drop, my chest didn't tighten. That would have been too generous. Instead, I felt cold. Not surprised, just confirmed. Word for word. He didn't even change the tagline. I watched them all laugh at his entrepreneurial spirit. None of them knew they were praising something stolen. Worse, I didn't even think he knew it was mine. That's how deep the dismissal went. They hadn't just taken my work. They'd passed it off as his because, in their eyes, I didn't own it in the first place. That night, I poured a glass of water, set it on my desk, and called my father. He picked up after 2 rings. "Mar," he said, like nothing had happened. "You okay?" "No," I replied, "but I'm getting there. Did you read the cover page before you gave him that business model?" He paused. "Too long." He needed something to pitch with. You were already stable. He wasn't. We just wanted to give him a chance. You gave him my chance, I said, calm but exact. You used what I built to save his face, and now you want to use my silence to keep it all neat. I'm done with neat. He sighed. You always make things more complicated than they have to be. No, they just hated when things became honest. After we hung up, I pulled out my scanner. I digitized the original notebook page, attached timestamps, watermarked it, and uploaded a copy to my drive. I didn't plan on suing, but I wanted it saved. Real, mine. I printed a clean copy and slid it into an envelope addressed to a legal contact, someone I trusted to hold it for me if needed. They thought I was the backup plan. They thought if Dorian failed, I'd quietly step in, clean up, and be too tired to object. But I wasn't a fallback. I wasn't a spare tire in their trunk of regrets. Later that evening, I lit a candle in my kitchen, not for ambience, but for control. I sat down, looked at my laptop, and uploaded the file to a public timestamp ledger, the kind used by small creators to protect intellectual property without a lawyer on standby. They couldn't unmake what I'd made. Not this time. I was done playing the role they'd written for me. If I was ever meant to be their backup plan, they should have asked what happens when the backup learns to walk away. The envelope was still warm from the printer when I slid it into my work bag and zipped it shut. It felt strange, walking around with something so small that carried so much weight, a document they would never expect me to have, proof that I'd drawn the line. I didn't send it right away. I just carried it, like a reminder. Monday came like any other. Coffee burned my tongue, the elevator was slow, and I barely made it to my desk before the first call came in. But it wasn't from a client or a colleague. It was from my bank. Ms. Duval, we're calling about a past due payment on your Capital Link business account. This is the final notice before collections. I blinked at my screen. I don't have a business account with Capital Link. A pause. Then, this account was opened 16 months ago. Address listed is 2817 Dawson Avenue. That was my parents' address. "Who signed the application?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Another pause. Then, "Authorized signer, G. Rayner." I didn't yell, didn't curse. I just wrote everything down. After the call, I submitted a fraud report and requested a freeze on any accounts tied to my name. I asked for a case number. I didn't tell them who G. Rayner was. That afternoon, instead of working through emails, I went down the rabbit hole. I ran a public record search under my social security number. It took less than an hour to find what I needed. 3 business filings, all active, all tied to Dorian's food franchise network. 2 listed his name as the operator. 1 listed mine, as financial consultant of record. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't seen a form. But there it was, in black and white, my name used like a tool. I stared at the screen so long my coffee went cold. Eventually, I closed the laptop. I didn't scream or break anything. The rage had become quieter by then, like a fever that stopped burning and started settling into your bones. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned until the clock read 2:37 a.m., then gave up. I padded to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table with the lights off. The glow from my laptop lit the space around me like a small stage. I didn't check email. I went back into the memory that had started resurfacing like a bruise under the skin. The day I graduated from business school. It had been drizzling. I wore a blue dress under my gown. The auditorium was packed with families holding flowers, balloons, handwritten signs. I had asked my parents to come. Velma had said they had a conflict. "You know Dorian has his final baseball tournament. We can't be in 2 places at once." So they went to the game. And I walked across the stage alone. No camera, no bouquet, no applause. That night, I told myself they must have felt torn. That maybe they were proud, but just didn't show it like other families did. I cooked myself pasta and watched reruns of old sitcoms, laughing too loud in an empty room. But now, looking back, I didn't believe they were torn. I believed they made a choice, the same one they always made. The next morning, I got up early. Not for work. For me. I pulled every document I had into a new folder on my desktop. I named it Rayner Evidence. Inside, I saved the screenshots of the fraudulent business filings, the bank records, the voicemail transcripts. I even included the graduation photo I'd taken by myself, just in case I ever needed a reminder of how long this pattern had been in place. I didn't post anything online, didn't call anyone to rant. I just kept it. Proof isn't for everyone else. Sometimes it's just for you. To remember that you weren't crazy, that you didn't imagine the hurt, that your silence was survival, not permission. People talk a lot about breaking away from toxic families with long speeches and dramatic exits. But the truth is, the break often happens in quiet moments, while organizing files, freezing credit, or clicking Save on a folder you hope you never have to open again. Some people burn bridges. Others, like me, take a scalpel to the connection. Slow, deliberate, permanent. Some people break ties with words. Others do it with paper and patience. It started with a vibration on the nightstand. One buzz, then another. By the third, I knew something was wrong. It was early, barely 7 a.m., and I never got that many notifications unless something had exploded. I pulled the phone toward me and unlocked the screen. The first thing I saw was a Facebook post from my mother, public, filled with over 300 comments and dozens of shares. It was long, performative, drenched in that overly polite cruelty she'd mastered over the years. "We raised a daughter who forgot who raised her," it began. She went on to accuse me of turning my back on the family, of leaving Dorian in crisis, of prioritizing a corporate title over human decency. She described my refusal to co-sign his loan as a betrayal that cut deeper than any stranger could deliver. She even called me a product of selfish success. The part that broke whatever peace I'd constructed was a photo she included. Me, at age 6, sitting on Velma's lap, laughing. A caption beneath it read, "Before she thought she was better than us." She had tagged nearly every relative we had, And Dorian? He liked the post. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't text anyone. I took screenshots of every word. Not because I was planning to fight fire with fire, but because I had learned, finally, that truth needed records. By the time I arrived at work that morning, my hands were steady, but my chest was hollow. The receptionist looked at me longer than usual, as if trying to decide whether to say something. 10 minutes later, my manager knocked softly on my office door. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded. We stepped into the glass conference room. She closed the door behind us and gave me the kind of smile people use when they're about to talk around the real issue. "There's something we need to address. A client, Crescendo Capital, has asked to be reassigned to another consultant." I kept my face neutral. "They cited concerns about public image, something about a personal family matter going viral." I blinked once. "Okay." "I'm not taking you off any accounts," she added quickly, "but I need you to manage this quietly. No posts, no statements, just handle it." "I understand." She gave me a nod, then left. That was it. I went back to my desk, opened a blank document, and began building a file. I titled it Contingency, Personal and Legal. Inside, I pasted every screenshot from the Facebook post. I added the business filings Dorian submitted using my name, the credit fraud complaint, the email from my bank confirming the investigation. I wasn't building a case for the court yet. I was building a shield, one they wouldn't see coming. I didn't post anything online. I didn't call Velma or Dorian. I didn't draft a paragraph of poetic justice, but I did send an internal memo to HR, complete with a timeline, supporting documents, and a short summary. If this ever interferes further with my professional standing, I'd like it known that I addressed it appropriately and quietly. That evening, back home, I set my laptop aside and stepped onto my small balcony. The air was cool. The world kept spinning. Just after 9 p.m., my phone rang again. "Velma!" I let it go to voicemail at first, but something told me to answer the second time. The call connected. Her voice was clipped, angry, sharp. "You could have ended all this, you know. You could have avoided everything if you'd just helped him." I didn't interrupt. "All we asked was for a little help. Your brother was drowning, and instead you threw us all under the bus. You're letting this family burn to the ground." I took a breath. Then I said, clearly, calmly, and without apology, "No. You lit this fire the moment you used my silence to protect your lies. If you're choking on smoke now, that's your consequence." She didn't say anything back. And for the first time, I ended the call. Not with rage, not with begging. Just a fingertip on a screen, and then peace. If you make a woman choose between her dignity and her family's approval, don't act surprised when she walks away with both. After the call ended, I sat still for a long while, the silence of my apartment stretching thick around me. I didn't cry. I didn't pace the floor like I used to. I just sat, letting the weight of her words sink somewhere I wouldn't carry them anymore. The next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office in uptown Charlotte with a tote bag full of proof and a spine stiffer than concrete. The receptionist looked up and gave me a polite nod, but I could tell by her eyes she'd read something about me online. Didn't matter. I wasn't here for their opinion. I was here for precision. "You ready?" my lawyer asked as I sat across from her. "Completely," I said. I placed everything on the table, printed screenshots of the defamation post, documentation from the identity theft report, the fraudulent business filings with my name, copies of emails that painted a clear picture of calculated misuse. She flipped through the stack, page after page. Her expression never changed. That was what I liked about her. No performance, just process. "This isn't just defamation or misuse of information," she said finally. "This is systemic, coordinated. They knew exactly what they were doing." I nodded. "Then it's time to draw lines they can't cross again." She laid out the plan. File for civil protection over my personal financial identity. Start an official fraud case. Notify the Secretary of State's office about the forged filings. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Clean, surgical, like removing a tumor. 3 days later, I got an email from my Aunt Cecilia, my father's older sister. We hadn't spoken in years. She'd always been quiet at gatherings, the kind of woman who watched more than she spoke. She invited me to her home, not a text, not a phone call, an actual handwritten letter on thick stationery, postmarked with intention. I drove out on a cloudy Saturday, past trees that had started to hint at fall. Her house was small, neat, filled with the scent of cloves and something baking. She greeted me at the door with a quiet hug and led me to the kitchen. No small talk, no ice breaking, just tea, silence, and something heavy waiting between us. "I need to give you something," she said after we sat. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a large manila envelope. Inside was a notarized letter, a will, my grandfather's. It read in unmistakable handwriting, "My shares in the Boone property are to go to Marlene Leahy Duval, who stayed with me and never asked for anything. She is the only one who sat with me in silence and didn't need to be the center of the room to be the heart of it." I stared at the paper for a long moment. "You knew?" I finally asked, voice low. Cecilia gave me a slow nod. "Your parents were supposed to tell you. They didn't. I stayed out of it too long." "Why now?" "Because silence only serves the liar, not the lied to." She didn't apologize. I respected that. She wasn't trying to feel better. She was trying to make it right. 2 days later, I met my parents at their attorney's office. Neutral territory, round table, bottled water no one opened. Velma wore beige and that expression that always said, "We're the victims here." Gideon started, "Look, we all want peace. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be." I opened my folder slowly and laid out the will first, then the credit fraud report, then the filings. I didn't speak until they had read enough to know what they were looking at. "You already made it ugly," I said, voice steady. "I'm just giving it structure." Velma's eyes flickered. "That will's invalid." "Not according to state law, and not with that seal." Gideon leaned forward. "We didn't mean to hurt you. You've always been so strong, Marlene. We thought you didn't need all this." "You were wrong," I said simply. "And now I'm done cleaning up after your messes." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to understand. After I left, I went home and opened my laptop. I started drafting a statement. Not a rant, not revenge, just a timeline, a record. Because I was done letting them write the story and leaving me out of it. They called it a family feud. I called it correction. The kind only truth can deliver. The morning of the court filing, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. No mascara, no lipstick. I didn't want to look polished. I wanted to look like someone who'd endured and still showed up. I took a rideshare to the courthouse downtown, left my car behind on purpose. I didn't want to fight with parking or show up flustered. I wanted quiet steps, intentional ones, the kind people take when they're not running from anything. At security, I placed my bag on the conveyor belt. The metal detector beeped, twice. The guard waved it off like he knew, like he'd seen enough women walking in with fire in their veins. Upstairs, courtroom 3 was half empty. No cameras, no reporters. Just a judge, a clerk, and a few rows of chairs, 2 of which held Velma and Gideon, both dressed like they were attending a retirement brunch. I didn't greet them. I sat alone, second row. When my name was called, I stepped forward. The filing wasn't dramatic, no gavel slamming, just paperwork. A request for severance of liability, my name formally removed from any future legal connection to the family trust, the business Dorian attached me to, and all linked corporate accounts. The judge reviewed the documents without much expression, then simply said, "Motion granted." That was it. No confetti, no apologies, just a stamp, a seal, a break. As I turned to leave, I passed by Velma and Gideon. They didn't move. They didn't speak. Just stared like I'd stepped out of a mold they never imagined breaking. Outside, I pulled in a deep breath and let it out slow. It was freedom without fireworks, the kind that makes space where shame used to live. 2 weeks later, I sat in a small podcast studio in Denver. I didn't promote it. I didn't ask anyone to listen. But when Elena Mathies, the host, invited me to speak about what happens when loyalty becomes a leash, I agreed. We didn't prep much. I didn't bring notes. She asked gentle questions, and I answered, clearly, without drama, without trying to make anyone the villain. I spoke about the internship I gave up, about the bike that never got ridden, about the invisible line between support and control, and how easy it is for families to blur it. I told her, they didn't just overlook me, they used me, quietly, because they thought I'd never say anything loud enough for the world to hear. She leaned forward slightly, nodded once, and whispered, "And now?" I looked straight ahead. Now I speak. The episode went live 3 days later. By the end of the week, someone reposted screenshots of Velma's Facebook post. Yes, the one accusing me of being heartless, alongside a clip of me talking about being manipulated into silence. I didn't do it. I didn't have to. The internet did what it does. A ripple became a wave. People commented, debated, shared their own stories. Someone from Dorian's investor group backed out. Another delayed their next payment. My parents never issued a statement, but they shut down the franchise's website for maintenance. The Yelp page quietly disappeared. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. I worked. I cooked dinner. I walked my dog in the evenings. Until one night, around 6:45, I got a voicemail. It was my father. No shouting, no defense, just tired words. "We didn't know you felt all of that. We're sorry you saw us that way." That way. Like my experience was a perspective. Optional, subjective, inconvenient. I didn't call back, but I didn't delete it either. It stayed on my phone. Like a scar you no longer cover up, but you don't press either. Later that evening, I sat on my small balcony, Denver sky bleeding from gold to lavender. My dog curled beside me, snoring softly, chest rising and falling like everything in him was unbothered. I watched the horizon shift and thought about how much I had tried to earn love from people who only offered it conditionally. I hadn't left my family. I had left the version of me they felt entitled to control, and I wasn't going back to her. By the time October settled into Denver like a soft coat, my life had thinned out in the most beautiful way. I wasn't trying to explain myself anymore. I wasn't drafting statements or gathering documents. My silence was no longer a defense. It was just peace. I woke up to the sound of birds near the window, the kind you only hear if you've stopped filling your mornings with noise. I walked my dog through the neighborhood park, a mug of coffee in hand, wrapped in an old hoodie. I passed a couple whispering harshly near a bench, their frustration familiar, but no longer mine. A boy rode past us on a bike too big for him. He wobbled, laughed at himself, and kept going. Something in that made me smile. I didn't check emails. I didn't think about whether anyone from back home was watching. No conference calls, no brand optics, no fire to put out. Just me, breathing, moving, existing in a city that didn't know my history and didn't expect me to carry it like a badge. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk with a half-full mug beside me, going through a few lingering work tasks. The quiet was soft, not heavy. It held me rather than pressed on me. Then a notification pinged. New message. Subject line. I should have said something back then. It was from my uncle, Ronald Fain, my father's younger brother. I clicked, expecting a forwarded joke or some awkward small talk. But it was 3 paragraphs of truth. He wrote that he had known for years that I was left off the trust, that he'd seen my name missing from the filings, the dinners, the plans. He said he thought about speaking up once, but didn't want to get in the middle of family decisions, and that he regretted staying silent. I know it's late, and maybe it doesn't count for much, but I see what you did, and I'm proud of you, Marlene. I didn't reply, but I read it 3 times, and I didn't delete it. That evening, I stopped by the grocery store to pick up a few things for dinner. In the produce aisle, I saw a young woman, probably early 30s, standing next to an older lady who kept correcting everything she put in the cart. "Do you really need all that pasta? You're always going overboard with cheese." Every word was just soft enough to pass as concern, just sharp enough to make your spine shrink. I saw the woman's face, trying to smile, trying to not react, trying to keep the peace that never really belonged to her. For a moment, I almost said something. I almost reached across that invisible line and said, "You don't owe her silence." But I didn't. I just gave her a kind look as I walked by. A nod that said, "I see you, I was you." She didn't nod back, but I think she felt it. I went home and started prepping dinner for a few friends. Nothing elaborate. Roasted vegetables, homemade soup, a bit of wine. I turned on a playlist I loved, but never used around my family. "Too emo," they once said. My dog curled up near the patio door, snoring like clockwork. When everyone arrived, we ate on the rooftop. The sun was folding into dusk, painting the city in soft amber. We talked about books, bad dates, second chances. We didn't bring up my family or what had happened. That part of me didn't need explaining anymore. At one point, someone asked, "Do you ever miss home?" I didn't hesitate. Not really. I miss the idea of it. But I'm living something real now. We clinked glasses. No framed portraits of parents on the wall. No legacy of sacrifice I didn't agree to. Just laughter, soft music, shared food. A life I built. Not to prove anything, but because I was finally free to choose it. Peace isn't loud, it doesn't make announcements. But when it arrives, and you know you earned it, it hums through your bones like a second heartbeat. "Hello, my name's Audra." They told everyone I walked away from the family, that I left Charleston years ago and never looked back. But what if I told you that wasn't true? That while they smiled in group photos and raised glasses under chandeliers, I was restoring the very house they claimed as theirs, brick by brick, with my own hands. And they never knew? They held a 100-year reunion, and my name wasn't even on the tree. But do you want to know what really happened when I showed up anyway? And they found out the house they were celebrating in was mine. Would you stay if you knew the lies didn't start this year, but decades ago? What do you do when the people who erased you expect you to thank them for the silence? The Charleston air always had a particular heaviness to it in spring, thick with humidity and magnolia petals that dropped like forgotten promises. I stepped off the bus alone, a canvas bag slung over my shoulder and a rental car reservation in my name that no one else seemed to know existed. No one waited at the curb. No phone call. No half-hearted welcome back. The driver didn't even ask if someone was meeting me. He just pulled my suitcase from the storage bay, set it on the cracked pavement, and left without a word. I stood there for a moment, trying not to let the emptiness creep in through the seams of my jacket. I adjusted the strap on my bag and walked across the lot, past a couple bickering about hotel directions, and into the rental car office. They handed me the keys like I was just another out-of-towner. I passed Whitley House on my way to the inn. I didn't slow down. The shutters had been repainted a glossy white, the lawn trimmed with cruel precision. From the outside, it looked like nothing had ever gone wrong there. I didn't trust it. The inn I booked was tucked behind a row of salt-stained homes, just far enough from the family compound to avoid running into anyone. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. The clerk gave me a key without asking for ID, just my confirmation number. That, somehow, felt worse. Upstairs, I placed my bag on the bed and sat down slowly, the way people do when they're not sure if the room will hold them. The walls were paper thin. I could hear the man next door coughing. I could hear my own breath. It was 4:43 p.m. when I opened the mailbox I still paid for. Dust coated the edges of every envelope. city tax notices, a real estate newsletter, 3 grocery coupons, and not a single word from my family. Not even a generic invite. Nothing with a crest, no email, no RSVP card. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. Elise had posted a boomerang of the reunion group chat, the names of everyone invited, dozens of them. I zoomed in, scanned line by line. No Audra. No me. My hand stayed frozen above the screen longer than I'd like to admit. That night, I called Elias. My voice was even. I kept it short. Just got into town, I said. Thought I'd swing by sometime this week. Yeah, he said. And then there was static, followed by a pause. I didn't hang up. On the other end, I heard her. Corinne. My mother. That voice that once told bedtime stories like they were sacred scriptures. I hope she has the sense not to show her face, she said, her tone clipped. It's hard enough keeping this family respectable without having to explain her. There was a long pause. A glass clinked in the background. I won't lie for her again, Elias. I won't do it. The line clicked again. Sorry, bad signal, Elias said, coming back on. What were you saying? Nothing, I said. Just confirming I'll be around. I ended the call before I could hear anything else. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded my clothes methodically. I sorted the contents of my folder. Business licenses, deed copies, preservation contracts. My name was on every one of them. Then I slipped a name tag, one they'd never seen, into a cloth pouch. Audra Shipley, Preservation Consultant, National Trust. Let them keep their show. Let them preen and pose in the mirror of a legacy they didn't build. I wasn't there to fight for a seat at their table. I brought my own table now. At 10:12 p.m., I booked a private site visit at the reunion venue. Under an alias. Just a simple line of text. Anna Myers, Event Liaison. Followed by my actual phone number. The system accepted the booking without hesitation. That was the part that always stunned me. Systems never asked questions. People did. The morning sun hit the windshield as I pulled up to Whitley House's back service gate. I hadn't driven this route in years, but the turn still lived somewhere in my bones. I kept the visor down, partly for the glare, partly for the habit of staying unseen. I waited for a delivery van to finish unloading before sliding through, quiet as a shadow. The keypad blinked red until I punched in the 6 digits only I knew. The gate buzzed, then clicked open. I drove in like I belonged, because I did. I parked behind the maintenance wing and stepped out. A maintenance intern glanced up from hauling floral crates. I nodded, and he waved with the kind of friendliness reserved for vendors or crew. Perfect. Inside, the air was colder than I remembered. The floors, though, gleamed like they had something to prove. That shine had my signature beneath it. I stood in the foyer a moment longer than necessary, letting the hush settle. This was mine, my hands, my money, my scars behind every restored cornice. A young woman walked in briskly, holding a clipboard. She barely looked up. You with catering or linens? She asked, tapping her tablet. I met her eye. Neither. I'm here for walk-through oversight. She pointed toward the East Hall without hesitation. You'll need to check in with Marcy. She's coordinating the timeline. I nodded and moved forward. No one stopped me. No one questioned the name I gave on the form 2 days earlier. Anna Myers. I had sent it with a burner email. That was enough to get on the schedule. No one ever looked twice at logistics people. We're not supposed to matter. I walked the familiar path through the rear corridor, toward the ballroom that used to be our grandmother's solarium. They'd turned it into an event space, vaulted ceilings, mirrored sconces, and 3 chandeliers that cost more than my first condo. They called it the Whitley Grand. The irony didn't miss me. 2 months ago, a request for venue rental landed in my team's inbox. The name on the request? Shipley & Card Logistics, a holding arm Elias had started years ago. I'd known right away who it was. They wanted to rent Whitley House for a private family event. The paperwork arrived with no note, no mention of me. I approved it under my company's preservation trust, billed them the non-profit rate, and never once corrected their assumption that the house belonged to someone else. They thought they were reclaiming legacy. They had no idea they were walking straight into mine. "Hey, ma'am?" I turned. A woman with blunt-cut blonde hair and a tight pencil skirt was squinting at me from across the ballroom. "Staff meals are in the back kitchen. We're running a little behind, so if you need to eat, I'd go now." "I'm good, thank you," I said calmly. "All right. But just so you know, we'll have to clear you out before guests arrive. Marcy doesn't want vendors in the way when the VIPs show." I gave her the kind of polite nod people mistake for obedience. She smiled, then turned to bark instructions at someone rearranging folding chairs. I walked to the stage setup. The arch they'd draped in ivory satin was my design, copied straight from a mock-up I created 4 years ago for a gala in Boston. They'd pulled it from my event portfolio without knowing the source. I laid my hand on the wood frame, smooth, steady, cold. "Probably just here to adjust flowers," someone whispered behind me. I let the words float. That's what they always thought, wasn't it? That I trimmed corners, that I ironed napkins, that I fluffed centerpieces but never signed checks, that I supported the weight of their pride without ever carrying a nameplate. "No," I murmured to myself. "I'm here to make history." I moved into the technical wing, down the stairs, and into the operations office. I logged into the event scheduler. My initials were in the footer of every form, subtle, small, embedded in corners where no one else would look. Catering confirmations, lighting cues, vendor tags, and at the bottom of the Friday night keynote plan, a locked folder. Phase 2, reveal, 7:45 p.m. No one had asked what it meant. No one had dared. Back upstairs, I stepped into the center of the ballroom. I looked up. The chandelier they installed with so much ceremony? I'd had it imported. Paid in full. They loved to brag about the house's historical status, but they never asked how it earned it, or who had to fight tooth and nail to make sure this property wasn't bulldozed into parking lots. It was me. It had always been me. But tomorrow night, they would finally see it, etched across the screen they'd ordered to display their curated slideshow. I walked to the back wall, checked the positioning of the projector, then turned off the main lights. Before leaving, I slid the staging diagram into the folder marked Final. Let them show up in gowns and pearls. Let them raise their glasses in a house they believe still belongs to them. They won't even know they've walked into my blueprint until it's too late to rewrite the script. By the time I pulled open the heavy doors of the Charleston Cultural Hall, they'd already hung the banners and lined the hallway with catered buffet trays. The smell of pulled pork and citrus-drenched shrimp wafted through the air like perfume too strong for the space. Voices bounced off the high ceilings, polite laughter smoothed over with old jazz. Nobody noticed I was late, because nobody expected me to show up at all. I didn't wear black. I didn't hover near the exit. I walked in steady, with my chin just high enough to make a statement, without starting a scene. The first face that turned my way blinked, then turned right back around, pretending I was another vendor looking for someone to sign off on the drinks order. To the right of the reception table stood what they were calling the legacy tree, a sculpted brass display stretched across a tall canvas, names engraved on gold leaves, arranged by generational branch. I stepped closer, more out of curiosity than pain. At least that's what I told myself. There were 4 leaves for my parents, 8 for my cousins, 5 for the new babies born since the last reunion. None for me. Jude, my sister's boy, wandered over with a paper plate full of fruit skewers. He was too young to understand the undertones in that room, but not too young to notice the absence of something obvious. "Aunt Audra," he said, chewing a piece of melon. "Where's your name?" I blinked slowly, then smiled. Maybe they ran out of space. He shrugged, unbothered, and drifted back to the dessert table. I stood there a minute longer, looking at that polished display. A piece of metal meant to honor a bloodline had found a way to remove mine entirely. I moved toward the back of the room, keeping a low profile. Small groups gathered in pockets, sipping drinks, passing phones to show old photos, nodding politely at updates about promotions or pregnancies. The kind of talk that fills a room when no one's willing to say what's really on their mind. "Don't let your kids play with Dylan," I heard someone say near the bar. I didn't turn, but I recognized the voice, one of my cousin's wives. The kind who wore heirloom pearls and still used words like appropriate and well-bred, without irony. "He's from her side," another replied. "That branch doesn't follow tradition." I scanned the room for Dylan. He was at the far end, fiddling with a Rubik's Cube, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. He caught me looking. I gave him a small nod. That night, as we lay on the stiff pullout in our motel room, he asked me softly, "Are we not really family, Mom?" I couldn't lie. I wouldn't. "We're just not the kind of family they want to show off," I said. "That doesn't make us less." He stared at the ceiling a moment, then whispered, "I'm okay not being like them." I bit my cheek, nodded, and reached over to flick off the lamp. The next day at the mixer, a folded newspaper sat on one of the tables. Its front page featured a glossy write-up of the Whitley House renovation, part of a local series on Charleston's historic properties. The headline praised the preservation effort, calling it a heartfelt revival led by local legacy bearer Eliza Shipley. Eliza, my sister, the one who hadn't stepped foot on the property until a year after I'd signed the deed. The one who once told me restoring an old building was a waste of talent. I kept my expression flat as Elias stood up and clinked his glass. "I just want to say," he began, "this family wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Eliza's vision and persistence. She's the reason Whitley House is still standing." People clapped, some cheered. Eliza gave a modest wave, the kind polished women give when they're used to being clapped for. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because in my purse was the permit, signed months before Eliza even knew the house was up for sale. Because I had the inspection reports, the restoration contracts, the city approvals, all in my name. But mostly because the wall behind them, I chose that paint. The floor beneath their feet, I picked that finish. That applause, they could keep it. Later that evening, back at the motel, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the website for the Charleston Daily. I hovered over the Submit Correction button, fingers poised. I started to type, "To whom it may concern, the attribution in your recent article regarding..." Then I stopped. I deleted the words, closed the tab, and whispered to no one in particular, "I won't need to correct the past. I'll own the moment." And the moment was coming. The next evening, I slipped into the cultural hall through the side entrance, 15 minutes before the family film screening was set to start. I told Dylan to hang back in the motel for the night. There was no reason for him to see any more than he already had. Some bruises didn't need repetition. Inside, the lights had been dimmed to a moody amber, flickering softly across the tall windows. Rows of cushioned chairs lined the center aisle. Folded programs rested neatly on each seat, printed with the title, "100 Years of Whitley, a Family Worth Remembering." I walked past them without picking one up. Corinne sat in the second row, her posture as tight as a drawn bow. Elias leaned in to whisper something, and she nodded, her mouth in that sharp line she wore when she didn't want to be asked anything. I kept walking until I found a seat near the back, close enough to observe, far enough not to be noticed. The screen flickered to life, and the first images bloomed in soft grays and muted blues. Children in Sunday clothes running through the orchard. My grandfather building the porch railings. A group photo from 1964, smiling faces in front of Whitley House before the hurricanes wore the shutters down. Then there was me. Just once. I appeared in a birthday clip, maybe 6 seconds long, 7 tops. I was 5 or 6, wearing a paper crown, sitting on the front steps, holding a cupcake. The next frame cut to Eliza playing piano at a school recital, then Gregory's graduation, then wedding shots, then more babies. My face never reappeared. It wasn't that they cut me out, they just skipped me. I didn't blink. I didn't shift in my seat, but every breath got a little heavier as the footage kept rolling. At one point, a woman behind me whispered, "Wasn't there another daughter?" "Estranged," came the answer. "Moved away, didn't keep in touch." I clenched my fists under the program I never opened. Months earlier, I'd submitted a formal request to be reinstated on the Shipley Heritage Committee. Just a simple email, signed and dated. I offered to provide archival documents. I offered to fund restoration projects. I got no response. Not even a line of acknowledgement. After the video ended, Elias passed me near the back exit, eyes flicking once in my direction. "They didn't think you were active enough," he said, voice low, like it would matter if anyone overheard. "Is that what they told you?" I asked. He didn't answer. We stood in silence until the hallway cleared. "I've restored 7 registered properties," I added. "Built a nonprofit from scratch. Paid to save the house they're clinking glasses in tomorrow. But sure, let's call me inactive." I didn't wait for him to respond. Back inside, the chatter rose again. Less about the film and more about the dinner menu. As I walked past the drink station, a cousin I barely recognized tugged at my elbow. "Just between us," she whispered, "you being here is making people nervous." I gave her a blank stare. "Some folks think you're here to stir things up, that maybe you're trying to hijack Eliza's big moment." "Is that what Eliza thinks?" She tilted her head. "I'm just repeating what I heard." I kept my voice even. "Tell them to relax. I didn't come to take anything. I came to confirm what's mine." She blinked, lips parting slightly, and I walked away before she could fill the space with another warning disguised as concern. The AV team had finished setting up for the next event, and I wandered toward the corner they'd marked as restricted. I made sure my name badge was flipped backward and approached the main console. "Need help?" one of the techs asked, friendly but firm. "I'm good," I said. "Just checking connection stability. Our nonprofit is considering a partnership." He nodded and moved on. That night, back in my room, I opened the event file on my laptop. The screen glowed blue against the dark motel wall. I scrolled down to the Friday night schedule and inserted a timed override for 7:45 p.m. 15 seconds only, just enough to get their attention. The file title was simple: Intro sought from ownership. I didn't add my name. I didn't need to. I sealed the final folder, double encrypted the backups, and turned off the screen. The plan wasn't complicated. It was just quiet. She didn't even flinch when they laughed at me across the table. But she'll flinch tomorrow. Friday evening settled over Whitley House like a silk sheet, smooth on the surface, suffocating underneath. Cars lined the drive. Every last porch light was on. The smell of catered rosemary chicken drifted out from the back terrace. I arrived before the sun dipped too far, wanting enough daylight to see the details I knew they'd try to claim. The foyer was bustling. Servers clipped name tags onto trays of champagne. A string quartet tuned in the corner. People laughed a little too loudly, talked a little too fast, like they were trying to convince each other they belonged there. I kept to the west wing while they gathered. This part of the house wasn't open to guests, not officially. The gallery hallway still held family portraits, our ancestors painted in stiff oil, their gazes always just above eye level. But the plaque at the far end was new. Bronze, polished, bolted clean into the wall. Shipley Trust, Historical Stewardship Program administered by Elias Shipley. I blinked. 10 years earlier, my father promised me stewardship of Whitley House, not in some dramatic proclamation, just him, me, and a mug of strong coffee at the breakfast table after church. "You're the one who gives a damn about the bones of this place," he'd said. "You'll keep it alive." But now his name was gone. Mine too. Replaced with my brother's, Elias, who once told me the only thing old houses were good for was termite training grounds. I smiled. Just slightly. Because they might have swapped names on a plaque, but the title deed? That was filed in my name with the Charleston County Registrar. I stepped away from the wall and headed toward the ballroom, where final adjustments were underway. That's when I heard it. "Is she part of catering?" a woman asked, not bothering to lower her voice. "I thought I saw her wiping down chairs earlier." Another chimed in. "She's probably just helping with setup. If she wanted to be seen, she'd have done something with her life by now." I stopped just before the archway. My hands didn't shake. I turned slowly, scanning the crowd until I found them. Two great aunts, both dressed like they were heading to a garden club gala. One sipped from her flute like it was a microphone. The other had the same brittle smile she wore at my high school graduation, when she whispered to Corinne, "At least your other daughter finished college." I lifted my glass and toasted toward no one in particular. They didn't see it, but I did. I moved to the far end of the room, where the seating chart sat on an easel. Someone had printed it in gold script, with decorative borders, and assigned table names like Heritage, Tradition, and Pillar. I found my name at a table labeled Legacy Support, 2 seats down from the florist. I didn't change it. I just stood there long enough for Elias to notice. He wandered over, drink in hand, eyes narrowing with that familiar discomfort of someone who knew they were out of their depth. "Something wrong with the list?" he asked, like he hadn't seen it before. "No," I said. "I just like seeing where people think I belong." He shifted. "Look, Eliza handled most of the logistics. I didn't review the final seating." "Of course not," I said quietly. "Why would you?" He took a sip of bourbon. I let the silence stretch just long enough to sting. "By the way," I added, "do you know whose signature was on the rental contract for this venue?" He paused. "No?" "Then I suggest you keep your eyes on the slideshow tonight." His brows pulled in, confused, but I didn't stay long enough for him to ask questions. By 7:15, the ballroom was glowing. Candles flickered on every table. Guests posed beneath the house crest, snapped photos with monogrammed goblets in hand. I stood under the chandelier they once told me I'd never see lit from the inside. That light? I chose the bulbs. Warmth over wattage. Noah, the AV lead, gave me a nod from the back corner. The trigger file was in place. 15 seconds. 1 title card. That's all it would take. I slipped my phone into my clutch, turned toward the crowd, and whispered under my breath, "Let them watch their history unfold, through mine." Saturday afternoon crept in quietly, the kind of stillness that makes every noise feel amplified. By 3 o'clock, the final vendor vans had cleared the circular drive, and most of the family was either napping off the wine from the night before or getting their hair done for the big evening ahead. I stayed behind while the others headed into town for last-minute errands and dry cleaning pickups. My moment didn't need makeup. I made my way to the East Wing, the part of Whitley House they turned into an exhibit space after the restoration. The walls held curated Whitley family moments, as the plaque said, rows of framed photographs, newspaper articles, a few artifacts under plexiglass. The touchscreen directory near the entrance welcomed guests to explore your lineage. I tapped in my name. Nothing came up. I tried again, slower. The screen hesitated, then displayed Audra Shipley, former student, left Charleston in her 20s. No record of return. No mention of the degrees. The land registry. The preservation awards. The national grant I'd secured to keep this building from foreclosure. I tapped the corner of the screen harder, but it didn't change. It sat there, unmoved, like the lie had been laminated into the history. Down the hall, a volunteer smiled politely as she rearranged some brochures. "They just added a whole new wing," she said casually, gesturing toward a door labeled Founder's Room. I waited until she turned to greet a group of early arriving cousins before I approached. The doorknob was locked. Of course. I flagged down a staff member who looked about 19 with a walkie clipped to his belt. "I'm here doing archival verification," I said evenly. "Can you open this?" He didn't ask for ID, just pulled out a ring of keys and popped it open. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paint. The display cases were lined with soft lighting and silk backing. On the right, portraits of my grandfather, letters he wrote to the city council about zoning ordinances, a dusty blue Boy Scout sash, his war medals, my father's wedding ring in a glass dome. On the left? Gone. There used to be a corner display of my architectural renderings, an article from Preservation Monthly, the signed deed transfer dated 8 years ago. All of it removed. In its place, Eliza's wedding photos, a lace veil draped artfully over a velvet pillow. A caption reading, "A Modern Legacy Continues." I didn't touch anything, didn't speak, but in that silence, I made a promise. By the time I stepped back into the main ballroom, the room was in full swing, florists doing final tweaks, table cards being adjusted, waiters checking silverware placement. I climbed the west stairwell slowly, one hand trailing the railing I'd personally approved to restore. At the top, I paused near the overlook that gave me a view of everything below. Noah was behind the tech table, organizing slides and nodding to a junior assistant. He looked up, caught my eye, and gave a single, short nod. It was all in place. I turned toward the far end of the overlook, where a framed photo of my father had been mounted just for tonight. They'd set up a table with hydrangeas, his favorite, apparently. I adjusted the frame by 1/4 inch. Enough to matter. Enough to say I was here. "I didn't ask for a crown," I whispered. "Just a seat." The doors opened below, and Corinne walked in. Hair done up, pearls gleaming, her posture like a column of pride. She noticed me immediately, didn't smile, just walked over with the gait of someone who'd long since forgotten what it meant to greet their own child first. "Please behave tonight," she said flatly. No emotion, just instruction. I turned slowly, keeping my voice measured. "I always do." There was a pause. "It's the record," I added, "that hasn't behaved." Her face didn't twitch, but her eyes narrowed just enough to register the weight of what I'd said. She didn't ask questions, didn't make excuses. She just smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her sleeve and turned to leave. I watched her disappear into the hallway with that same practiced indifference she used when strangers asked if she had 2 daughters or just one. I walked to the edge of the balcony and looked down at the room filling with people. Some would smile at me tonight without knowing why. Some wouldn't look at all. Didn't matter. They clinked glasses and smiled wide, unaware they were standing on the stage I built. The lights dimmed right on cue, and I slipped quietly behind the row of ferns flanking the ballroom's western wall. The noise dulled into that anticipatory hush. Forks lowered, shoulders straightened. Whispers stopped mid-sentence. They thought it was time for the slideshow, and it was. Eliza stood at the center of the room, framed by candlelight and pride. Her red dress shimmered under the chandelier I'd approved to rewire 2 years ago. She gave a little wave, modest, rehearsed, and cleared her throat as the first few images flickered onto the massive LED screen behind her. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice warm and hollow. "It's been a privilege helping bring our family home back to its rightful glory." Rightful. That word hung in the air, heavier than any toast. She went on about honor, legacy, and the hands that shaped us. Her eyes drifted once toward Corinne, who nodded as if she were receiving an award. I waited, not with impatience, just certainty. Then came the flicker. The screen jolted, paused mid-transition. A collective breath hitched. The slide that followed wasn't part of the cue they'd previewed. White text appeared over a matte black background, centered, clean. Whitley House, restored and owned by Audra Shipley gasps, rose like a wave across the ballroom. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the marble floor. Eliza's mouth parted, but no sound followed. Then came the photo. Me, standing in front of the property with the deed in hand, sleeves rolled up, dirt on my boots, sun behind my shoulder. The real image, no edit, no filter. Eliza turned slowly, still facing the crowd, but watching the screen from the corner of her eye. Her voice cracked, barely audible. I didn't approve this, but no one was looking at her anymore. Corinne sat motionless, lips drawn so tight her face looked carved from stone. A vein pulsed just below her ear, and for the first time that night, she wasn't controlling the narrative. Noah turned off the projector, as instructed. The screen returned to black. The entire interruption lasted 15 seconds, exactly what I'd planned. A pause followed. Dead air, uncomfortable and perfect. And then, from the back of the room, a voice called out. That house was saved because of her. Heads turned. Ms. Etta, one of the church elders, stepped forward. She leaned on her cane, shoes polished and dressed simple, but her presence filled the space like scripture. We wouldn't have our choir hall if she hadn't stepped in, she continued. Don't rewrite history when the ink's still wet. Her eyes met mine across the room. I nodded. Just once. I didn't need applause. I didn't want it. The silence was louder. Elias approached me near the stairwell, where I'd returned after the override. You could have told us, he said. His tone wasn't accusing, just small, smaller than I'd ever heard it. You already told me who I was, I replied. I just stopped believing you. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For once, he didn't defend, didn't explain. He simply moved aside, clearing my path. I crossed the room, slow and measured, heels echoing on the tile. Corinne hadn't moved. Her hands rested in her lap, perfectly still, but her jaw was tight. I stopped beside her, not out of drama, but closure. You planned all of this, she said, not looking up. No, I replied. You did. When you chose your silence over my story. That landed harder than anything I could have shouted. I turned before she could recover, stepping away just as the first hesitant clap began. It came from someone I didn't recognize. Then another. Then more. But I didn't stay for the ovation. I didn't need their approval wrapped in retroactive grace. I stepped up toward the stage, not to speak, not to pose, but to exist. Fully. Without their version of me muting my presence. They clapped because they had nothing else left to say. And for the first time, the weight left my shoulders quietly, not because I was accepted, but because I no longer needed to be. After the slideshow ended and the clapping faded, I slipped out before anyone had the chance to find their courage. The ballroom lights buzzed back to full, the champagne resumed its pour, and the conversation limped back to safe topics. Weather, business, where someone's kid got into college. But I was already in the hallway, heels muffled by the carpet, breath steady. In a side room behind the stage, I found a chair and sat, not because I was tired, but because I wanted the moment to land fully before it disappeared. That was the thing about justice. It rarely announced itself like thunder. Sometimes it arrived in 15 seconds of text on a screen. Elias came in 5 minutes later, alone. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, fiddling with the edge of a folded piece of paper like it had weight he wasn't used to holding. I found this in Dad's file, he said, handing it to me without ceremony. Meant to give it to you earlier. I took the paper gently. It was old, creased twice, the edges soft, like something read more than once. It read, If she ever takes the house, I hope she remembers why she cared in the first place. It wasn't the walls. It was the people who used to fill them. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting, and I knew what it cost him to write that, especially living in a house ruled by silence. Elias shifted. He knew. He just couldn't say it with her around. I nodded once. I didn't thank him. I didn't need to. We both understood. Later, I made one last pass through the ballroom after the guests had cleared out. The space looked stripped of intention again, like a shell after the tide retreats. Wrappers near the bar, a napkin left folded perfectly in a chair, as if someone still thought they might return to it. I walked across the room slowly. Every footstep on the herringbone floor I'd saved from demolition echoed with memory. I stopped beneath the same chandelier I'd stood under the night before. The light was dimmer now, just the evening fixtures on. I adjusted the portrait of my grandfather by 2 degrees. I wasn't sure anyone else would notice, but I would. Then I reached the panel near the switchboard and turned off the lights. The whole room went still. No fanfare. Just quiet. Outside, the breeze carried the smell of gardenia and the sound of the city pulsing gently in the distance. Near the back garden, I spotted Corinne, standing near the boxwoods. Her back was to me, but when I approached, she turned without surprise. "You got what you wanted," she said, voice clipped and without inflection. "I didn't come for anything," I replied. "I came to keep what was mine." Her eyes narrowed. "You embarrassed your family." "No," I said softly. "I corrected a story you kept rewriting." She opened her mouth, maybe to offer something. Justification, denial, or worse, another instruction. But I turned before she could decide. Some silences are stronger than comebacks. I didn't hear her footsteps behind me. Noah met me near the front corridor. I handed him the spare key set to the private office and the schedule file for future events. "You're not keeping the place?" he asked. "Oh, it's still mine," I said, "but I've seen enough of it for now." I stepped outside into the soft dark of evening. Dylan was waiting in the car, a paper bag of leftover cookies in his lap and a comic book resting on his knees. He looked up. "Are we going back to Asheville now?" I slid into the driver's seat and fastened my belt. "No," I said. "We're going forward." As we pulled away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The house was framed in the glow of porch lights. It looked proud, but not smug. And for the first time, it didn't feel like it was trying to keep me out. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. By Sunday afternoon, the roads between Charleston and Asheville had become more familiar than they should have been. The kind of familiar you don't brag about, just the quiet knowing of how each curve rises before it comes. We'd arrived home just past noon. Dylan dropped his comic book on the hallway table, toed off his shoes, and flopped onto the couch like the world owed him a break for riding in silence for 4 hours. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Some silences are earned. Upstairs, I unpacked my suitcase slowly. Nothing in it was especially meaningful. A pair of earrings I didn't wear, a blouse that still smelled faintly of Whitley House, and the folder I hadn't opened since Friday night. I placed it in the back of my closet, on the shelf with the childhood journals and the lockbox of family recipes. Maybe one day I'd toss it. Maybe not. I heard footsteps behind me. Dylan stood at the doorway, holding something I hadn't seen in years. A scrapbook, the green leather-bound one I used to keep under my bed before we moved. He opened to a page and pointed. "These pictures? That's the old house, right? Before the fix-ups?" I nodded, sitting beside him. "You really did all that?" "Some of it," I said. "Enough of it." He flipped another page. The edges were frayed, the glue barely holding. There were photos of the demolition permits, grainy images of rot under the beams. The day I signed the restoration contract, I didn't realize how much of it I'd documented. Maybe part of me always knew I'd need proof, even if only for myself. The next morning, I opened my laptop and checked email. There was one message from Elias. Subject: Property Trust. Message: There are questions from the board about the rental and ownership split. I didn't say anything. Thought it best you handle it. No apology, no small talk, just acknowledgement. Which, in our family, was practically a handwritten confession. I didn't reply. I archived the email and closed the laptop. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance, it's closure. Later that day, a friend from Charleston sent me a link to a local blog that had reposted an excerpt from the reunion slideshow. The headline read, "The Woman Who Bought Her Family's Legacy." The comments were exactly what you'd expect. "Well, that's bold. About time someone flipped the script. Families can be the cruelest mirrors." I read them all. I didn't click like. I didn't reply. just red. There was one comment that stuck with me. She didn't take it back. She just stopped asking for permission. And I thought, yes, that. That night, after dinner, I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper and a pen I'd stolen from Whitley House when I was 16. Back when I still thought stealing meant you were taking something that didn't belong to you. I wrote, "Mom, I don't need you to change. I'm not even asking you to understand. I just want you to know I never needed your approval. I just wanted to not be erased." I stared at the paper for a while. The ink didn't smudge. The words didn't waver. Then I folded the letter neatly, carried it downstairs, and dropped it into the fireplace. It caught quickly, burned clean. Dylan and I went for a walk later, up the gravel trail that curled behind our neighborhood. It was lined with wildflowers this time of year. Daisies, coneflowers, a few scattered Queen Anne's lace. The kind of path no one trims, but still stays beautiful. He picked a stem and spun it between his fingers. "Do you feel better now?" he asked. I thought about it, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. "Not better," I said. "Just honest." He nodded, satisfied, then ran ahead, the flower still in hand. I let him lead. I'd spent too long chasing things that never waited for me. There was no curtain call, just silence. And finally, it didn't feel cruel,